timetables and economic efficiency considerations instead of what is optimal for human wellness. Like my own family, a band of ancient hunter-gatherers woke with the rising sun, were active and apart during the day, and reconnected in the evening before going to sleep after it got dark. Over the course of the year, they stayed in tune with seasonal variations. Rather, they lived in tune with those variations. There was no other option. But it wasn't just food and sleep behaviors that followed natural patterns. It was everything. In their diet, their physical movements, and their social interactions too, our ancestors and modern-day primitive tribes stayed in tune with the rhythms of nature, eating different foods in different seasons and in different places, moving their bodies in different ways at different times based on the demands of their environment, and exploring the world freely at times and staying closer to the familiarity and safety of the tribe at other times. The whole arc of their lives followed a pattern that mirrored the seasons of a year. They were born, they budded into adolescence and bloomed into adulthood. They contributed to the tribe through physical labor and sharing wisdom. They shared their lifetime of accumulated wisdom with the rest of the tribe, planting seeds for a better next generation, and eventually they died, often at a very advanced age. Of course, many of our ancestors died prematurely due to infant mortality, accidents, infection, or acts of violence. I'm not trying to paint a romanticized picture. But in general, their lives were rhythmic and circular, even leisurely, not because they wished them so, but because that's the way it was for people so immediately dependent on and immersed in nature. Research shows us that contemporary hunter-gatherers actually have considerably more leisure time than we do in our modern, convenience-laden, productivity-oriented society. My family, of course, didn't have to live so close to nature, and in 1983, when I turned 5, we pretty much stopped doing it. We closed up our cabin, sold our land, and moved closer to a small town called Brockville. Although we still lived in a rural setting on an apple orchard outside of town, we adopted a more conventional way of life. Our new house had electricity and running water, and I attended a small school with other kids from town. By and large, I left behind my intimate connection with nature and those seasonal rhythms. I finished elementary and high school, attended university in the United States, earned a degree in anatomy and physiology and a graduate degree in physical therapy, and lived in a number of places in the country. I was always attentive to healthy living. I ate well, conventionally speaking, played competitive volleyball, climbed big mountains, and rode mountain bikes. But I didn't think about natural living per se, and my own personal habits were as artificial and disconnected from natural rhythms as most people's. That began to change in 2007 when my father passed away prematurely of pancreatic cancer. Deeply impacted by his death, I began to look at my life in new ways and to question many of my lifestyle choices. I was a healthy 20-something working in a profession that I enjoyed. I was lean and fit, eating in ways that most people consider healthy, and blessed with a strong network of friends. Anybody who met me would have considered me the very picture of health. But the reality was more complicated. Deep down, I sensed that not all was right. I was working too hard and obviously not getting enough sleep. I had some adult acne and chronic inflammation in my left shoulder. I felt stressed and overstimulated, and while I thought I was more or less happy, I also felt adrift, lacking a deeper sense of peace and rootedness. I had lots of friends, but I still felt pretty isolated. What was I really doing with my life? Always intellectually curious, I read a number of books and research papers that cued me into our evolutionary past and its enormous relevance for our present-day health. I became especially fascinated with the idea of physiological rhythms and began chasing down anything I could find in the scientific literature on that topic. There was quite a lot of research out there, hundreds of published papers that I eventually read and analyzed. What I discovered fascinated me. Biologically, we're walking around in bodies that are well adapted to gathering seasonal plants and hunting ancient animals, sleeping deeply during the hours of darkness, and living and working together as a tight-knit tribe. Bodies, in other words, that operate on nature's clock and expect cyclical variations in our key lifestyle behaviors. All of our physiological systems and even individual cells have internal mechanisms that align us with nature's oscillations between on and off, active and resting, open and closed, expansion and contraction. More tangibly, rhythmic patterns are encoded on the molecular level in the DNA of almost all living things, even single-cell organisms that lack a nervous system and the ability to communicate in complex ways. Rhythms are perceptible everywhere. We are not on-off creatures.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.